On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 211. The motion is adopted.
The United States House of Representatives passes a massive $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, handing President Biden his first major win. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. At nearly $2 trillion, it's bigger than the GDP of countries like Canada and Brazil. But when President Joe Biden signs the COVID relief bill into law later this week, it's set to deliver checks to millions of Americans, extend unemployment benefits, and among other things, increase funding for vaccine distribution and schools. It's a massive undertaking with huge expectations. For more, we turn now to CGTN's Nathan King. So Nathan, this was a hard-fought win for the administration. It went largely along party lines. So break it down for us. What does it mean for the average citizen, and what happens next?
Well, over 280 million Americans are getting a $1,400 check, and it's not taxable, and just before tax time, they're going to be thankful for it. Also, unemployment benefits extended until September. That's the top up from the federal level. It wasn't $400. They worked out $300. And there's a real massive change in the tax code. If you have kids, especially under 6, you're going to be good. And it's basically seen as helping out many people who were not helped out during the Trump administration's first relief bills. And it's by far the biggest. Some studies say it's far bigger than actually the New Deal in the Depression of the 1930s. It's a massive shot in the arm for the US economy. There is a big debate about whether it's needed, but remember, President Biden was vice president under Barack Obama during the financial crisis, and that recession lasted a long time, and they thought they did too little. This time they may be doing too much, but Nancy Pelosi, the head of the Democrats, the Speaker of the House, says it's a hard-fought win and it's good for the American people.
This is indeed a special and good afternoon. This is a momentous day in the history of our country because we have passed historic, consequential, and transformative legislation.
Now, obviously, it did pass along partisan lines, and remember, Joe Biden came into office saying he'd try and be bipartisan, and Republicans have not voted for this, but the White House is kind of spinning this and saying, look, it is bipartisan, because if you look at the polls, over 60% of Americans want this bill. Many Republican governors who have seen their states suffer financially are going to be helped by this, and so therefore it is bipartisan. But the Republicans very much say this is just a list of liberal spending priorities disguised as a COVID relief bill. Let's listen to the minority leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy.
History will not be kind to what transpires today, but I still believe that America is a great hope for the future, that we're all conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that we are equal. But in this body, it seems as though only one can have a voice. But that will not last long, and that will change shortly.
Yeah, you can see that the change in power has led to a change in attitude from the Republicans. Remember, they rushed through a big tax cut in the Trump administration. This is essentially the same in terms of spending. What's quite incredible, though, is that it's a very good day for the Biden administration. Halfway through his first 100 days in office, the biggest piece of legislation that he wanted has passed.
Nathan, I just want to get away from Capitol Hill for a moment. There's a bit of breaking news. The United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, announcing in a tweet that he'll be meeting on March 18th with very senior foreign policy officials from China. They will be meeting in Alaska. They're going to be discussing a wide range of issues. What can you tell us about this?
Well, hopefully I'm going to be going. We're just looking into booking tickets right now, and it's quite incredible that this is coming so quickly into the Biden administration. Remember, Antony Blinken, the new Secretary of State, and Jake Sullivan, by the way, National Security Advisor, will also be on that trip, is heading to Asia to speak to allies, the Republic of Korea, also Japan, but essentially on the way back, they've decided to move this up. Yang Jiechi, the most senior diplomat in China, and also Wang Yi, the foreign minister, will be there, we understand. It's a very good sign of engagement so early on. You know, there was a lot of talk that the Biden administration would continue essentially without the rhetoric of the Trump administration when it comes to tariffs and other criticisms of China and movement on human rights. This is the first opportunity for both sides to sit down together. There are many, many issues to talk about. What's going to be very, very interesting is to see if they can hash a way forward in terms of moving on with the trade deal, maybe lowering tariffs, and also finding a way forward on the difficulties that the US has had with China when it comes to what China says is essentially its domestic concerns, Hong Kong and Xinjiang, and also Taiwan as well. I mean, this is a real opportunity so early on in the Biden administration to try and hash something out. Unfortunately, it's going to be below freezing. I looked at the weather in Anchorage, Alaska a week from today. Let's hope that the diplomatic talks are more of a thaw. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how these experienced diplomats in the Biden administration handle their counterparts in China, and whether this leads to some sort of confidence building measure, because let's face it, the last couple of years have been pretty horrendous.
Thanks, Nathan. Good to see you. That's CGTN's Nathan King reporting there. Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Steve Chagaris is an analyst and the political editor for Al Jazeera Online. Katie Barlow is an attorney and media editor for SCOTUS blog. Chris Hahn is also with us. He hosts the Aggressive Progressive podcast and the syndicated Chris Hahn radio program. And Eric Bowling is a best-selling author and political commentator. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Eric, let me start with you. Let's talk about this COVID bill, which will become law possibly by the end of this week. As Nathan told us, there is widespread support among the American people for this legislation. 2/3 say it will help the economy, and as Nathan told us, more than 60% say this is a good thing. Yet there is zero support for this law among Republicans in the United States Congress. How does one explain this disconnect? Eric, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I didn't know what that was to me. Thank you, Anand. It's a travesty. I might as well throw my hands up and say we've thrown the towel in. We've become a semi-communist, a socialist nation. We're handing over $2 trillion for the second time. We're $28 trillion in debt, which means we are on our way to adding more debt onto the United States national debt than any time in history when President Obama doubled it from 10 trillion to 20 trillion in 8 years. Trump slowed it down. Like it or not, Trump's addition to the national debt slowed down because he gave things away. However, the economy sped up and tax revenues increased even though he dropped tax rates. What we're doing is we're trying to increase tax rates, increase what we're giving away to people. We want to lift trade barriers. We've become a communist nation. We've become socialism.
Eric, what's the alternative? People are in trouble right now. They need to buy food. They need to pay rent. They need to pay their mortgages. They need to send their children to school.
So here's an alternative. Here's a smart alternative. We're giving away $1,400 to everyone of age, everyone of working age. How about we give away this amount of money, $1,400, to the people who are left unemployed by the COVID pandemic? That would cost us about, I don't know, maybe a quarter of what $1.9 trillion, so maybe $500 billion. We're approaching $1 trillion per year annually, servicing our debt, servicing our debt, not paying back our debt, $1 trillion, which is half the Canadian economy.
I should point out, Eric, that former President Donald Trump wanted $2,000 each going to families. But I want to move on to Chris Hahn. Chris, as I said, zero support from Republicans. This is what the Republican Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, had to say. Let's listen to him.
This isn't a pandemic rescue package. It's a parade of left-wing pet projects that are ramming through. They're ramming through during a pandemic. Our country is already set for a roaring recovery. We are already on track to bounce back from this crisis. That's not because of this bill. It's because of our work last year. It's the trend this new Democratic government inherited.
So, Chris, what do you make of these political divisions?
Republicans would have supported this bill if Donald Trump proposed it and he was president. They are obstructionists. What Eric said about our nation becoming communist over this is hyperbole. And I remember when Eric used to care about the stock market. The stock market today closed higher than ever. And if there's anything more capitalist than the Dow Jones Industrial Average, I don't know what it is. And they seem to like this bill. So I think that Republicans need to start taking their cues from their constituents who wanted to see this bill pass because they believe in what the Biden administration is doing or trying to do to rescue this American economy and bring us out of the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis that the Trump administration failed to address. As for his sudden religion on deficits and debt, Donald Trump raised the debt more than any one-term president in the history of this country. That is a fact that we cannot escape, and Republicans finding religion on it now, it's just convenient because they want to have obstructionism. They want to have a reason to oppose Biden, but the American people are not buying it. They like this bill. This is going to help the economy recover. We are going to be back
Eric, I'll
on
get to you.
top again.
Go ahead, Eric.
So Chris leveled some accusations towards me. Chris, nice tie, but you've been wrong on everything you've said so far. Of course, everyone is concerned about the stock market because everyone has some sort of risk to the stock market. In other words, a 401k. However, that's not the economy. The economy is the broader economy. It's unemployment. It's the housing market. It's all those things, which, by the way, wait until there's not a check coming. Wait until there's not $1,000 or $1,400 or $2,000 on the horizon. Watch what happens to all these things. Yeah, the stock market is juiced because everyone's expecting $2 trillion to hit it in one way, shape, or form. And by the way, as far as one-term presidents increasing the debt,
that's what stimulus is.
You take the increase in national debt per year by President Obama was number one. Guess who'll be number two?
Okay, I want to move on. Steve,
whatever.
Let's try and get something of a detached look at what we're talking about right now. I mean, we have people in this country who are hurting emotionally. They're hurting financially. They need to, as I said, pay their rents, pay their mortgages. There are millions of people out of work, millions of people underemployed right now. Yet we see Republicans stand rock solid in opposition to this bill. What is the political calculus here?
The political calculus for the Republicans, and they've made it clear since they lost control of the Senate and since Trump lost the election, which is they're going to resist what the Democrats are doing. They feel that that is on brand for them. They feel that's going to be a strategy that will work for them going into the midterms and long term. The question on this specific bill, however, is the polling doesn't back them up on this. As you mentioned, overwhelming number of Americans support the bill. But there was some polling out today, which I thought was very interesting, is that low-income Republicans, a majority of them support this bill as well. So they're not really in lockstep with where Americans are on this. Now, they're hoping that, in a couple of months or a few months, either this bill doesn't have the intended effect that Democrats are expecting, and/or people will just forget about this bill as you get close to midterms, and they'll be able to move on to other topics. And there are other topics that could stymie the Democrats and Biden. So, I think that's what Republicans are banking on at this moment. It's March. The midterms aren't for another 20 months. And I think they figure this is the beginning of their stand against what Democrats are pushing for the next 20 months.
Katie Barlow, this is sometimes referred to as the COVID relief bill, but let's look at the pandemic itself in the country. There have been delays in some states, but it looks like those people who are eligible to get the vaccine will be vaccinated by the end of May. That's hundreds of millions of people in the United States getting the vaccine. And this is what the director of the CDC in the United States, Rochelle Walensky, had to say about it. She had some good news. Let's listen.
CDC recommends that fully vaccinated people can visit with other fully vaccinated people in small gatherings indoors without wearing masks or physical distancing. Remember, here we are talking about private settings where everyone is vaccinated.
So, Katie, what is your feeling on this? What do you make of it? Are we beginning maybe to start turning the corner?
Yes, and the stimulus package today, part of that money is to help expedite the process of getting these vaccines out all across the country. The Biden administration has already gotten two business rivals, Johnson & Johnson and Merck, to work together to amp up the number of doses. He just announced today another 100 million doses from Johnson & Johnson. That's a single dose, and that's particularly helpful for older communities, more rural communities, and being able to have a single dose, have that be effective, and have them not have to come back to get a second round. What the CDC also said today, though, that is particularly interesting to me, is they're keeping an eye on the ball on allowing access to rural communities. Right now, you can get a vaccine, and they're working on partnerships with CVS and Walgreens, but there are not CVS's and Walgreens in some smaller towns across the country. I'm from Georgia. There are no Walgreens and not many CVS's in the smaller towns. And so they announced a potential partnership with Dollar General, which says to me that the CDC is keeping their eye on the ball, is focused on getting the vaccine all across the country, even in rural communities where our traditional outlets of getting the vaccine out are not necessarily available. So it seems like all hands are on deck, and it's working.
Eric, there are both Republican and Democrat governors who have decided to lift restrictions. The difference being that in many instances, the Republican governors that are lifting restrictions are lifting them in the absence of vaccinations, Texas being one of them. President Biden was responding to this a few days ago, and he called it Neanderthal thinking. Are GOP governors risking the lives of their constituents, their people, because of politics?
No, I think Democrat governors are, because I will tell you, you look at Florida, the state of Florida and the state of Texas both have lower incidences of death due to COVID than California does and New York do, who are clearly not ready to lift the restrictions. Add to that, and this is a very important topic that no one's really talking about, the number of overdose deaths that are going on right now, the number of deaths, suicides that are going on right now because people are stuck in their home. They're not allowed to go out. Those are exploding. So I saw some number like 95% increase in overdose deaths that are happening right now. So there is no indication, there is no science that says what California and New York have done is any safer for their populations than what Florida and Texas have done. Now, Florida and Texas have been aggressively opening and reopening. Here in South Carolina, you wouldn't even know there was COVID here right now in South Carolina. I have friends in New York who are like hoping to be able to go out to dinner. So if there's no indication of that, why are we risking people's lives and the economies of these major states simply because Democrats have used opening? They use a mask, and they've used opening or closing their economies as a political football, and no science backing it.
Chris Hahn, right now there's at least 61 million Americans who've received at least one dose of the vaccines. President Biden, as we heard earlier on, is planning to buy an additional 100 million doses of the vaccine from Johnson & Johnson. That's the one-shot vaccine. It's a great achievement, but we look at a Monmouth University poll that was done, which tells us that a quarter of Americans, 25% of Americans, including 1/3 of Republicans, say they will not get the vaccine. I mean, could all this great work that's being done be undone by that?
Some of it can, and it's a shame. I think that every American should listen to the science and get vaccinated. I think it would have helped if former President Donald Trump would have gotten his vaccination publicly, because a lot of the people who are not getting the vaccine are skeptical of it, and he could have helped alleviate that with some of his supporters. I think that people need to talk to their doctors and not look at something on the dark web that they might agree with if they hadn't read it. I think it's very, very important. As for the states opening up early, every state has got some opening. New York State, 75% capacity in restaurants. Schools are open for the large part. But why Texas feels that they shouldn't have a mask mandate for people in public, it's just kind of ridiculous. I don't want anyone to be the last person to die of COVID-19. I understand what Eric says about people committing suicide and overdoses. I believe that's a major problem in this country that needs to be addressed right away. But we can have some sort of balance here. What's happening in Texas and Florida is completely out of balance. Let's have some social distancing. Let's keep the masks on until everybody's vaccinated. And then, hopefully by the summer, this will be behind us and we can start to be back to normal in America. We're almost there. We're at the end of the road. Don't be the last fool to die of COVID-19.
Chris, what about Eric's other point that even in states, Democrat states for that matter, which have been playing by the rules, following the science, numbers are still high?
Yeah, I mean, look, New York and California got it first, and they got it hard. So the numbers were harder and worse. As for Florida, I don't trust their number. They're not counting deaths from people who live there transiently. And everybody knows somebody who lives in Florida part-time. I have several family members that live there part-time. So I don't trust those numbers, quite frankly. But you got to remember, New York and California got it first. They didn't know how to handle it right at that point. The CDC was not offering proper guidance early on because it was a brand new virus.
Who got it first has no
it was something we had
relevance
never
on
faced before.
Who's successfully managing it,
Florida
Chris,
and Texas. Florida and Texas had the benefit of the mistakes made by California, New York, and other states that got it early. They learned those lessons and they adjusted appropriately.
It's a year into
Thank
this,
God,
Chris.
hallelujah.
It's a year into this. You can't say they got it first, therefore it's worse for them.
All right, I need to move on.
Wrong, false.
Right, I need to move on. Steve?
Yeah, and the president Trump did nothing.
Yeah, Steve, I want to turn to immigration. There are more than 3,400 unaccompanied minors at the United States southern border with Mexico right now. In fact, during the month of February, which was the first full month of the Biden administration, shelters in the United States took in something like 7,000 migrant children. There, of course, are also children who've been separated from their parents, and the Biden administration has promised to reunite them with their parents. This is the Ambassador Roberta Jacobson, talking about reuniting those children with their parents. Let's listen.
Today we are announcing the restarting of the Central American Minors Program for children to be reunited with a parent who is legally in the United States. This program was ended abruptly by the previous administration, leaving around 3,000 children already approved for travel stranded. In Phase 2, we will be working to improve the CAM program to expand safe and legal avenues to the United States.
Steve, we know that immigration is a hot-button political issue. It can make or break an administration. How do you see this playing out?
Well, this could turn into a major political problem for Joe Biden and the Democrats. I mean, look, they're going to emphasize what they're calling the humane aspects of this. The whole campaign on immigration during the presidential campaign was about how Donald Trump's approach to it, in their mind, was inhumane. And so, of course, these are the kinds of things you're going to hear from the Biden folks. But the reality is, this is a flood of undocumented immigrants hitting the border right now. I think the number for February is 100,000, which is up about 22,000 from the previous month, and it's I think 3 times what it was last year. And so the Biden administration, they're not calling this a crisis, and whatever you want to call it, it's definitely spiraling into a political crisis. And what it's doing is it's really handing the Republicans a free talking point against them. I mean, look, Donald Trump gave a speech a couple of weeks ago down in Florida, and one of the things he hammered Biden on was immigration. And if this doesn't get under control for Democrats, this is the kind of thing that may overshadow some of the successes he's having early with this bill and other things that he's doing policy-wise. Don't be surprised to hear Republicans just completely hammer away at this and say Donald Trump was right in his approach to dealing with the border. That's, I think, what you're going to hear from Republicans moving forward.
Katie, what are your thoughts on the immigration debate? You know, for years we've been hearing from both Democrat presidents as well as Republican presidents that this country's immigration system needs a major overhaul. There needs to be comprehensive immigration reform. I mean, would it be fair to say that that's not going to happen right now?
I think that's right. I mean, right out of the gate, the Biden administration reversed several Trump administration immigration policies. In fact, some of them were in the Supreme Court, before the Supreme Court currently, including border wall funding and the Muslim ban and the public charge rule that basically prohibits immigrants who we may think will take advantage of government programs, not allowing them to come here or have green cards. So that was a lot of action right out of the gate. And when all of that happened at once, then there was confusion and mixed messaging about the border. And that allowed folks like smugglers and other people south of the border to be able to communicate openly. You know what? It's a new administration. The border is open. Let's go. And that's creating issues at the border right now. And so they need to take a minute. It's a new administration. It's a complicated issue. And they need to communicate clearly exactly what their stance is, what will happen at the border, how these cases will get processed, particularly those with minors. But what I think just happened with the stimulus package, which the Biden administration said on the campaign trail, of course, their first priority was tackling COVID, both the physical need for vaccines and also the economy. They've done that now. They've at least put a huge chunk of help on the table. And that frees up some political will for their other policy goals, things like climate change, but also immigration and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. All of those things now the Biden administration at least has some political will to turn to and try and get something done in what I believe will be this narrow window of political power with the majority of both houses of Congress.
Eric, I've just got a couple of minutes left, but I want to get to one other big important political issue, and that is voting rights. In the state of Georgia, one of the houses in the state has passed legislation which would repeal no-excuse absentee voting. Georgia didn't do as well as it expected for Republicans in the last election. We also have the House of Representatives here in Washington, which has passed legislation to expand voting rights for people. Are we going to see this whole question of voting rights re-emerge as a major issue in this country?
I believe it will, because Trump believes that the laws and rules surrounding voting is what cost him the election. Katie, just allow me to correct one thing. There was never a Muslim ban. It was a ban from certain countries that happened to be predominantly Muslim. That needs to be said. Catch and release. Immigration will be the 2022 hot button. Trump and the Republicans believe they're going to take back the House and Senate on immigration. On voting, absolutely. When you need an ID to go into the Democrat National Convention, show your ID, but not to vote in this country, that's a problem.
Right. Chris, I want to get your view on this. I mean, what is happening in the state of Georgia is not just happening in that state. It's, in fact, as of February 19th, lawmakers in more than 40 states had introduced more than 250 bills that include voting restrictions. Are we seeing voting rights being gutted yet again in the United States?
Absolutely. Republicans cannot compete with ideas, so they're trying to choose who can vote. And they want people who are not likely to vote for them to have a harder time voting. It's just that simple. They do it through gerrymandering, they do it through voter ID laws, they do it through making it harder to vote in cities where you're going to have 10-hour lines in Georgia, but nobody's allowed to hand out water to you. That would be a crime there. Why would somebody pass a bill like that? They would do that because they don't want you to vote, because they are afraid of the people they serve. What they should try to do is come up with popular policies like this COVID-19 relief package, instead of just obstructionism and whatever Donald Trump decides at any given moment should be the policy of the United States of America. Maybe then Republicans wouldn't be afraid of voters, and they would want more people to vote, not less.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.